Okay, we're now looking at classification of epithelia. We now are looking at the classification of epithelium. I'm going to say that step one, not that they're really in steps, but that's me. Step one is to determine, and this involves nomenclature. How do you name the epithelia? How do you name the epithelia according to epithelial guidelines, according to, shall I say, histology guidelines? Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is classification by shape of the epithelial cell. Classification by shape of the epithelial cell. If the epithelial cell is flat, we call it a squamous shape. If it is as tall as it is wide, we call it a cuboidal shape. If it's taller than it is wide, we call it a columnar shape. So the three major shapes are squamous, cuboidal, columnar. Now, sometimes you can have epithelial cells that can change shape. These are called transitional. Transitional epithelial cells are found lining organs that can stretch. Lining organs that can stretch, like the bladder. In the urinary bladder, if you have hardly any urine in there, then the bladder is contracted more and the cells are columnar. As the bladder starts to fill and stretch the wall, it will turn to this. And then finally, if it's a lot of urine in there, it'll get real flat and tight. So the transitional can assume different shapes depending on the degree of stretch of this hollow organ, like the bladder. Okay? So that's classification by shape. Here we are right here. Squamous, cuboidal, columnar. Okay? Now, the next thing. Stacking. Stacking. We want to say, is it one layer of epithelial cells or is it more than one layer? If it is one layer, it is called simple epithelium. Simple. If it is more than one layer, it's called stratified. If it's one layer, it's called simple. If it's more than one layer, it's called stratified. Now, if it appears to be stacked but is not, it's called pseudostratified. So let me explain that. In order to be stratified, the second layer of cells must have a cell below it. The second layer must have a cell below it. If it's the third layer, it must have two cells. So pseudostratified, when it's under the microscope and small, would appear to be stacked but is not, because all the cells basically reach the basement membrane. All the cells reach the base. They just appear to be stacked, but they're not. Pseudostratified. So simple, stratified, or pseudostratified. Now, here's simple. One cell layer. One cell layer. Here's stratified. Notice that this cell here has one below it, so this is truly stratified, truly stacked. Truly stacked. Now, naming wise, okay. Remember we had the different shapes, right? Okay. Now I want to draw your attention. Look here in this stratified where these cells here have a different shape than the top. So you have a disparity of shapes here. How do we name it? Because you got one cell shape here, another here. By international convention, you name by the top layer. So though this is stratified and this looks more cuboidal, the top layer is squamous. So this, in fact, would be a stratified squamous. A stratified squamous. You name by the top layer. Because generally the bottom layer, most of the time, does not have the same shape as the top layer. Okay, we go a little further. Here's an example of pseudostratified. Now, if you look here, all of these cells reach the basement membrane. Even though this cell is taller, it's still reaching the basement membrane. Now, under the microscope, somebody would see these nuclei and those nuclei. They'd say, oh, it's stratified. Not really. because all of the cells are touching the basement membrane. The only difference is you have some short ones and some tall ones. So it would appear because of where the nuclei, but it is a pseudostratified. It's falsely stratified. Okay? So we go here. Here's types: simple, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, transitional, pseudostratified, all meeting, and then stratified cuboidal, stratified squamous. All right. What are the functions of epithelium? Because the function kind of decide whether it's going to be stacked or what the shape will be and so forth. The functions of epithelia, the main function, of course, is protection because it's the top layer. But epithelial cells can also wear a second hat. They can even wear a third hat. So in addition to protection, which they all do, there could be diffusion through the cells, osmosis, secretion, so forth and so on. Okay? So we want to be cognizant of that fact because it's not just pick any cells. The reason certain shapes and whether it's stacked or not are picked has to do with what the function is, in addition to the protection. All right, here's some examples I want you to glance at. Types of epithelia. This would be simple squamous. Simple squamous. Where would we find this? And this will be part of our lab stuff. I'll have you name stuff. I'll be sending pictures or something and you'll name it. This right here is simple squamous. Under the microscope, you'd see this. Now, this came from the lung. This came from the lung. So this would be simple squamous. Okay. Simple squamous can be in different areas. If it's lining the inside of a blood vessel, it'll be called endothelium. So in ANP2, we'll talk about that. If it's lining the serous membrane, it's called the mesothelium. Now, some of you on TV, some of you looking at TV may hear these advertisements from lawyers, legal, called a mesothelioma. That people exposed to asbestos may have a mesothelioma. Because some of the lining around the lungs, which is called the pleura, can become inflamed and can form a cancer known as a mesothelioma. So so mesothelium is a fancy name for epithelial cells of the serous membranes. The serous membranes are the pleura, pericardium, and peritoneum. Here is simple cuboidal here. Simple cuboidal. Right there. Secretion, absorption. See right here. Now, I'm going to go back to simple squamous. Simple squamous is good because it's so thin to allow diffusion and osmosis because you can go straight through the cell. If we go to simple cuboidal, it can do a multitude of things because it's the in-between shape between the columnar and the simple squamous. A lot of time what it does is line ducts. Now this is in the kidney, to line ducts. See how these cells are as tall as they are wide? Simple cuboidal. Here's simple columnar. They are tall. They are good for absorption, secretion, and so forth. Now that absorption, where would a good spot for absorption? The intestine, to absorb your nutrients. So see, these here are tall, nice and tall. Okay. Here's a pseudostratified columnar. The pseudostratified columnar, most of the time, these cells will either secrete or have cilia. In a pseudostratified, they will either secrete or have cilia. Now, in pseudostratified, the basal cells are the regenerative ones. Because, see, these here are getting flicked off. So these here can do mitosis unequal. The cytoplasm would be unequal, so it can replace this. But in the pseudostratified situation, most of the time they have cilia. Remember, cilia sweep things. This example is from the trachea because you sweep mucus up and either spit it out because the mucus gets the dust and everything coming down. Here is a stratified squamous. Best spot the skin. Back in some other areas, but best spot the skin. They're showing here in the mouth region because that's also present, a stratified squamous. Stratified squamous there. Okay. Here example, stratified cuboidal. See this cuboidal? Here's stratified columnar. See the bottom cells, different shape than the top, but you always name from the top. Always name from the top, stratified columnar, okay? Transitional epithelium, stretch. These cells are more rounded, but when you start pulling on them, they start getting flatter. They're pretty much always stratified. That's why we don't see anything. The transitional is always stratified, so you never really see anything about that because there's no simple or stratified. They always have several stacks. So here's a review again of these different types that we saw before. Review. Right? Now we go to the glands. And the glands are formed from epithelia. So we're going to start another PowerPoint. Another video PowerPoint here to talk on glands, but they come from epithelia.